here in Ananda, Portland. And thank you all for all the hospitality that Badri and Lorna and the whole team here has shown. And it was wonderful being with some of you for our workshop yesterday. Um, just the song that we sang and a few other things, including what's mentioned in the reading for today, made me realize that being aware and being alert is so important on the spiritual path. And I remember Badri and Geeta and the kids and I went out for dinner yesterday and went to a Japanese place. And there was a lot of food that was circling around on this conveyor belt, the carousel. And Jay had to be really alert and watch when whatever he wanted would come by, because otherwise he had to wait for 2 or 3 minutes. And he was like a hawk, he couldn't be distracted. But I realized, as you did when we were singing today, that we have to be aware of what's happening, the part that we are supposed to be playing, and we have to be listening. And so I thought the whispers that I could read is from, of course, Yogananda's Whispers from Eternity, is a prayer demand to be kept ever awake and ready. O Father, if thou wakest me, how can I ever sleep again? If sleep should steal upon me, wilt thou awake me? The terrors lurking in the dream jungle of life are now forgotten. My sorrow has, by thy grace, been changed into tears of joy. All my tiny emotional joys blaze into bliss. My body temple is filled with thy light. Its rays keep the eyes of my wisdom from drooping. I thank thee, Father, for keeping me always awake and ready. And there are many of these whispers from eternity, and you read them and you realize why they are called prayer demands, because Yogananda has a very strong assumption, even as he's praying to God, that God is on his side. As you can see, he's thanking God for helping him, he's thanking God for making things right and for supporting his efforts. And this is something that is all of us, because we are coming out of an age which was, the understanding of religion was more medieval, that either God was on the other side and we had to convince him of our goodness, or was at best neutral, and the thought that, well, the divine power is on our side and wanting to spur us on is not something that we easily tune into. And so these whispers from eternity and all the talks that we have where we share, it reminds us, that as we were talking about at the fire ceremony, the fire is there to help us. It's not there to burn us. And it's not going to either help us or burn us depending on the choices we make. It's there to purify us, and we have to draw on the power of that fire to set ablaze all forest of darkness that we've created with a lot of our doings. And so this talk, the topic today is on faith. It's a tricky topic, as if you saw the reading, it wasn't all sweet and easy. There is, of course, the part where Yogananda got those children to cross that dangerous waterfall because he had strong faith. But as he said, it cannot just be an assumption, and we have to cultivate that faith. And that is the journey of the spiritual path. We can't presume. Now, maybe you are one of those people whose faith always is very strong. But I suspect that's not always true. So this talk can be approached from two different ways. One is how to keep our faith strong and how it all resolves everything. And there is value to that. But I suspect everybody goes through dry patches in their life where the faith itself is shaken and you don't know whether you have that faith. What do you do then? And I have some, I hope, wonderful stories which will give you inspiration on exactly what you can do when that happens, because it happened in my own life about 12 years ago. This was 2012. I was in India. Just a couple months before what I'm going to tell you about, I had gone to India. I was in the US. I was doing a master's in Boston University when I decided I would rather train with a master rather than earn a master's, and wanted to train with these great masters. So I said, I'm going to India and I'm going to be a monk. And so, of course, I left my schooling and went back to India, and I decided I'm going to be a monk, which I've been now for 13 years. But at that time, it was just a month and a half, and Swami Kriyananda, our founder, was in his body. He was in India. He was in Gurgaon, which is very close to the capital of India, in the heart of India. And in a few days, he was going to fly to Europe for his next leg of his visit to the communities there. And Swamiji was staying as the guest of some of our members in Gurgaon in pretty much the best hotel that was there in Gurgaon, 7-star or whatever, however many stars you can put on it, it had all those stars. And the stars are fine, but the more the stars, as you know, the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The more the stars, the pricier the menu is also a corresponding law. Now the monks decided that we'll go meet Swamiji at one of the lunches which was being hosted there, all-you-can-eat meals. And because Swami would be there, other Ananda members who were visiting were there. And at that time, I had gone back and I was on a monk's stipend in India. And we were only getting the work started. So I think the stipend was something like $80 a month, half of which you had to pay back as dues to the community. So maybe $40 or $45 a month was your monthly stipend. And so we go there to the all-you-can-eat place, and the cost of that is about $50 or $60. Now that is a big amount probably here in the US, but you translate it into the Indian economy, it's a pretty high amount. And I was wondering, how the heck is this going to work out? And I knew I had pretty much exactly the same amount in my wallet, which I was happy to spend. I didn't mind it. But it turned out that our head monk, Shankara, who was a Yale graduate, he's American, he's been in India for 20 years now, somehow he decided to pick up the tab for everybody. So I said, oh, great, this was nice. Divine Mother just stepped in and helped us. Until the next day came, and somebody said, hey, the Swamiji is still in the same place. He leaves later tomorrow. Why don't you all come again and meet everybody over lunch? And by that time, everybody was thinking, I was thinking, Shankara, he had spent all the money he had taking care of all the monks. And so we were not sure how this was going to work out. And I was like, okay, if push comes to shove, I have exactly the amount I need to go into that restaurant, but I would have loved to also be able to support my brother monks if that was possible. And Shankara was very, very centered. He wasn't talking much. He had expended all his money. And he just showed in, and we were sitting at the table before we knew, because you eat first and then you pay. In 7-star, they don't assume that you'll run away without paying your tab, so you don't have to pay first. And so you can sit, and so we were all eating, and when the time came to pick up the tab, I was sitting next to Shankara. Somebody just came and said that Leela, who was Swami's chef, she had picked up the tab for all the monks. And when that happened, Shankara, he was just saying this to himself, but I was sitting next to him, so I heard him. He said, I had told Master that you have to take care of us this time. I've spent all that I have. And so sure enough, somebody came in and took care of all the finances for that meal. But then I realized something, which was my great discovery, and I share it with you. It's like, Shankara had that faith. I didn't. So if the law was very exact, what should have happened is his tab should have been picked, and I should have been left to fend for myself. He had faith, I did not. And I learned a great, great lesson there. You don't need to have your own faith, but you need to be with somebody who has strong faith, and that is enough. Of course, when I said this to Dhyanaji, she's very fiery. She says, why don't you get your own faith? I says, yeah, I'm working on it. It takes time. But now, lest you think this was an anomaly, many of you have read Autobiography of a Yogi. If not, a treat awaits you. There's a chapter, 2 Penniless Boys in Vrindavan. And that chapter, see, this is where If you take away, and this is a very good exercise to do, in every chapter, there is one key climactic part of that chapter. Take that away and focus on rest of the chapters, and you'll find many nuggets there that are hidden, because there's one big incident that happens, and the chapter is named after that. That's where our focus is, on that entire chapter. But if you try to look at other smaller miracles, then you see that there's so much else that you can pull out from that chapter. So, two penniless boys in Vrindavan, what happens? Yogananda is challenged by his brother to go to this city without any money, without telling anybody, and he has to be fed, he has to be shown all the places in that city, and he has to find the tickets to come back on train to his brother's place. And as a witness, unwilling witness, he has to take his friend Jitendra with him. So the two of them are sent to Vrindavan, and they are supposed to do all these things and come back. Now Yogananda has faith, absolute faith. And in fact, when you have absolute faith, you don't even need to pray. This is another nugget you will see in that chapter if you think about it. All of Yogananda's needs are satisfied, but how many times does he pray in that book, in that chapter? 0. Because he's just sure that Divine Mother will take care of him. And so he has complete faith, but his friend has no faith. Half the time he's pinching Yogananda here and there, saying, what the heck have you gotten me into? How are we going to be fed? Well, we got fed, that was luck. Now how are we going to find out look at all the sights in the city? Now that was luck. How are we going to get back? And by the time probably the chapter is over, Yogananda's one side of his body is probably red with all the pinches he's got from his friend. Now, what should have happened? One person has faith. The other has absolutely no faith. He's been dragged along into this test. So I would have assumed what would have happened is Yogananda gets his lunch, Jitendra is left out to starve, Yogananda gets to see all the sights of the city, and Jitendra is left out without being able to do any of this. And Yogananda gets a ride back, and Jitendra has no ride back. Isn't that how, if A has faith, B does not have faith, this is how it should work? But the only thing Jitendra does right, even if it's unwillingly, is he's latched on to Yogananda. And what Yogananda receives, he receives also. The reason I say this is, very few people will go through life being able to depend on their own faith. And when you come to that point where your own faith is not enough, band together or be around people of strong faith. Ananda would never have come to fruition if it depended on everybody's faith, because in the early years, there was no Ananda. There was only Swami Kriyananda with immense faith in and knowing that this is going to work. And others probably didn't know whether this would work or not, how it would work out, how would the finances come. But they saw Swami and said, he has that faith, let me be with him. Let him lead the charge and let's support him in that venture. And in that time, in that way, gradually people strengthened their own faith also. Swami wasn't always there for all the communities to form. I don't think he directly was involved in Ananda Portland being formed or Ananda Sacramento being formed, but the people he had trained over the decades had eventually developed their own immense faith to be able to make these things come to fruition. So for all of us also, it's important that we tune into either one person or a group of people when your faith feels low and be with them. You don't have to suddenly say, I have all the faith, because then it can be presumption. As Yogananda said, that teacher, he didn't have the faith and he presumed on it, and it didn't really end so well. So we have to play this sort of fine line between gradually strengthening our faith but not presuming on it, but also tagging along with people who are very, very strong. Now, Yogananda himself, in the autobiography of a yogi, there's many examples where Yogananda talks about this principle, and I want to read this for all of us. Now, when he was young, his Sanskrit tutor was Swami Kebalananda, an exalted soul who was a disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya. And he says, if any invisible barrier rose in the path of my concentration, I would meditate at my Guru Lahiri Mahashaya's feet. There, the most tenuous states came easily within my grasp. Such perceptions eluded me in the presence of lesser teachers. The Master was a living temple of God, whose secret doors were open to all disciples through devotion. And then later, Yogananda talks about his own experience. He says, Sri Yukteswar affected me similarly. If I entered the hermitage in a worried or indifferent frame of mind, my attitude imperceptibly changed. A healing calm descended at mere sight of my Guru. Every day with him was a new experience in joy, peace, and wisdom. And now Yogananda was himself a master. Remember, he had demonstrated in that chapter, Two Penniless Boys in Vrindavan, that he didn't really need any other prop. He was complete within himself. But he was also showing us how we can, when we feel low, tune into all these resources of faith that we have. And now, as Yogananda said, as soon as he entered the hermitage in a worried or indifferent frame of mind, my attitude imperceptibly changed. Now, do we have a hermitage here which we can enter if we are in an indifferent state of mind? Right here, or at the chapel in the Portland community or other places. If you are of a different faith, have that place where you can enter which has people who are strong on the spiritual path. Because you will see, as soon as you do that, something changes. There's more light shining in our hearts, and the world feels better, and we feel we'll get through this. I think we all felt that at the Kirtan night we had on Friday, at the class we had yesterday, and I suppose the world outside isn't going to change in the 15 minutes, 20 minutes we are spending here or an hour, but when we go out, we'll see that it appears like it has changed, because our hearts are in a different place. Now, this is the power of faith. Faith does not change the outer world necessarily. Because even when Yogananda was in his body, World War II was raging, and other wars were raging. But it teaches us how to be fixated on the light, and how to bring that light to the people we are supposed to care for, to the circumstances we are supposed to help. And it also teaches us how not to get over-involved. Because when we get over-involved, we are no longer helping the situation, we are just getting over-involved. And, there's no benefit to that. So all these things, and this is where, unless we are there where our faith is absolute, we do have to use prayer. We have to draw on that power. We have to allow that power to help us in our hearts. And we have to remember one thing important, because one of the main reasons people can lose faith is because they expect perfection. See, every path has a drawback. And the path of discipleship, the drawback can be self-doubt. We feel we are not good enough. And hey, we are not good enough. I mean, unless we are in the state of samadhi. So what's there to feel bad about? But in the other way, God does not need us to be good enough. That's never a criteria. If you read the vow of discipleship, if you read any of the commandments Jesus read correctly, you realize that he's not saying that you are not worthy unless you are good enough, but he's showing you how you can refine your goodness so that the divine can manifest in you to a greater and greater degree. And it's the divine power. Again, coming back to this fire ceremony, the things we talked about yesterday, it's the divine power flowing through us, changing us, that makes us perfect. We often think we first have to be perfect or good, and then God will come to us. When we have perfected ourselves, then God will come to us. What kind of unconditional love is that? We always talk about God having unconditional love. That's highly conditional love. I mean, if you are perfect, then I'll come to you. Otherwise, I won't, unless you get perfect. And so it's not like that. It's like, many times people also say, when our meditation is very still, God will come to us. Well, if our meditation is already very still, what's the point? I'm holding this because I have a quote here. What's the point of God coming to us at that point? It's like saying, focus on a movie, and then it will become enjoyable to you. But the movie is supposed to be enjoyable, and then our attention is held. We can't put the onus on us. And so it's also the same with the divine. We do our best, but it's the coming of God into the ambit of our meditation that makes meditation enjoyable. And don't put the cart before the horse. You do your imperfect part, and suddenly you see, when you do that imperfect part enough number of times, it creates magnetism. And magnets draw things to themselves, and the divine is drawn into the presence of our consciousness. And suddenly, in that same meditation space, you see, hey, this meditation feels wonderful. I hear the inner sounds, or I see the inner light. And when that happens, you automatically sit in that state for a longer time. You know, it's when you can hear the inner sounds or see the inner light or feel God as joy that you can sit for a longer time. It's because God has come that your meditation has become joyful. So I want to read to us this quote because I hope this reinforces our faith. And Yogananda put it this way. I saw this in, some of you went to the shrines in Los Angeles where Yogananda was. That's where I saw this quote first. I was leading a group with Krishnadas 2 years ago. And we were in a lake shrine in the sunken gardens there. And somebody was giving us a history of that place very nicely. But right behind that person was the quote for the day or quote for the week, which was this one. And as soon as I read that, quite literally, I lost consciousness of everything else. And for that entire day, this quote was riveting in my mind. So I want to read this for all of us. The soul is bound to the body by a chain of desires, temptations, troubles, and worries. And it is trying to free itself. If you keep tugging at that chain, which is holding you to mortal consciousness, someday an invisible divine hand will intervene and snap it apart, and you will be free. And I said this in a different way yesterday when we were talking about Lion King, if some of you remember. But remember, all you have to, you didn't create that chain that binds you. Maya was created by God, by a power far greater than you. You can't break it. But you tug at that chain, imperfectly, weakly, as much as you can, and keep tugging at it, a little bit, and keep tugging at it. And as Yogananda says, that activates the divine law that we are made in the image of God. You're already made to be free, and we have to be freed. And what happens someday? An invisible divine hand will intervene and snap it apart, and you will be free. Many blessings.